Have you ever wondered why a single night can change the course of an entire family's life? What hidden lessons lie buried in the echoes of our childhood homes? Imagine stepping back into 1950s Kentucky, where simple routines mask the storm about to unfold. Kishen Doshanshu. Minutes, we'll uncover a remarkable true story of fear, courage, and the unbreakable bonds that saved a family. You'll learn 3 powerful insights on resilience, 2 essential strategies for overcoming injustice, and 1 timeless lesson on the strength found in love. QNEN. NTUNE. UNE. We begin. I'd love to hear from you. What moment from your own childhood taught you the greatest lesson? Let us walk this path together. History, hardship, and hope await just beyond the first door. Kurnathus, YouTube. Let's dive in now. 1. Small town, bliss and family dynamics. I grew up in Lexington, Kentucky. Not the bustling city you might picture today, but a quiet town with unpaved roads, white picket fences, and neighbors who all knew your name. Our home was a modest corner house with a tiny front garden where my mother, Martha, tended her brilliant dahlias. She loved those flowers as if they were her second children, and their colors painted a portrait of warmth and care that matched the spirit inside our home. My father, Samuel, was an accountant at the local textile mill, a man of quiet strength who measured his words as carefully as he balanced the factory's ledgers. Each evening after supper, he'd sit on our front porch with a small transistor radio pressed to his ear, listening to the Cincinnati Reds game while I curled up at his feet with a cloth doll Mama had sewn for me. It was a simple life, but one wrapped in a blanket of love and routine. Sunday mornings meant church service at First Baptist. Sunday afternoons brought spaghetti with chicken, Daddy's favorite dish. Evenings were for catching the cool breeze on our porch steps, greeting passing neighbors with a wave and a smile. I was their miracle child, the one who arrived after 3 heartbreaking miscarriages. Mama would often say this softly as she brushed my hair before school. You're our blessing, Teresa. Never forget that. I loved school, especially English and history. My teacher, Mrs. Margaret, saw my curiosity and always slipped extra books into my little vinyl satchel. Adventure stories, tales of faraway lands. In those moments, Lexington's dusty streets seemed to stretch all the way to castles and kingdoms I could only dream of. Looking back, what strikes me most about that chapter of life wasn't the grand events, because there weren't any. It was the ordinary that made it beautiful. The scent of cornbread wafting through our kitchen, the sound of Mama humming country tunes as she washed clothes in the yard, the joy of hide and seek with the neighbor kids until sunset called us home. Sometimes, life's greatest treasures are found in the moments we barely notice until they're gone. Cherish them while you can. But as seasons change, so do the winds of life. And beneath the surface of our happy little world, a shadow was about to creep in, one that no amount of dahlias or baseball broadcasts could keep at bay. Because one Sunday, with 3 sharp knocks at our door, that shadow took form. And that's where our story truly begins. 2. First signs of control, the patriarch's unannounced arrival. It was a Sunday much like any other. Mama had just served spaghetti with chicken, and the 3 of us were lingering at the table, full and content. The late afternoon sun poured through the kitchen window, catching the soft blue of Mama's apron as she tidied up. Then came the knock. 3 sharp, deliberate raps at the front door, not a neighbor's polite tap, not a friend's casual knock, but a sound that seemed to demand attention. Daddy rose slowly. I remember his face. The color seemed to drain from it in an instant. Stay here, he told Mama and me, his voice tight. When he opened the door, there stood a man I barely recognized, my grandfather, Colonel Augustus Forrest. Tall, straight as an oak, dressed in an impeccable gray suit that seemed untouched by the summer heat. His eyes, cold, icy blue, swept the room as if he were inspecting a barracks, not visiting family. A faint scent of mentholated aftershave hung in the air long after he entered. Samuel, he said, offering neither smile nor embrace. I've come too. See how you're living. At that moment, I saw something in my father I had never seen before. Fear. A deep, quiet fear that seemed to age him in an instant. He addressed his own father as Sir in our home, his voice edged with deference. Colonel Forrest walked through our modest living room, shoes clicking against the wooden floor, eyes scanning every object and every person. When he spoke, it wasn't with curiosity or warmth. So this is your family, he remarked, as if assessing a piece of furniture. Then his gaze landed on me. "Come here, girl." Not an invitation, a command. Trembling, I looked to my father. He nodded gently, and I approached. "What's your name?" "Teresa, sir," I whispered. "Speak up." A Forrest commands attention. His words weren't meant to nurture, they were meant to mold, to bend. As he studied me, I noticed something beneath his jacket, a black leather holster. Its purpose unspoken but impossible to ignore. "I expect discipline," he told my father. "A Forrest must be educated with rigor." Even at 8, I felt it. The room had changed. Our home no longer belonged to us. It belonged, at least in part, to him. Control rarely arrives shouting. Sometimes it walks in through the front door, impeccably dressed, speaking softly, but taking up all the space in the room. And once a force like that enters your life, it rarely leaves quietly. From that day forward, Sundays would never feel the same. And the next Sunday, the Colonel returned. This time with an expensive porcelain doll in hand and an agenda that went far beyond gifts. Now, let's explore how control often disguises itself as generosity, and how each gift the Colonel brought into our home came with invisible strings attached. 3. Gifts as a Trojan horse, refinement or manipulation. The next Sunday, as promised, Colonel Augustus Forrest returned. But this time, he didn't come empty-handed. I remember the moment so vividly. There, in his gloved hands, he held a large box wrapped in fine silver paper tied with a satin ribbon. "For the girl," he announced, placing it on our dining table as if he were bestowing a medal. Inside was the most beautiful doll I had ever seen, porcelain skin, a velvet dress, shiny patent leather shoes. "A girl must learn to be delicate like porcelain, but strong inside," the Colonel said as he handed it to me. "Do not break it. If you do, there will not be another." Even as a child, I understood there was more beneath those words, a warning wrapped in a gift. At first, Mama and I were hopeful. Maybe this was a gesture of peace, a grandfather trying to connect. But over the weeks that followed, the gifts kept coming, and so did the messages attached to them. A china cabinet, large and ornate, out of place in our simple living room. "Your house needs refinement," he remarked. "A Forrest home should reflect its name." A Persian rug, thick and richly patterned, that covered our worn wooden floor. "You must learn to live with dignity," he said, looking pointedly at Mama. A powerful new radio, replacing our small old one. "One cannot cultivate intelligence with poor tools," he declared. Each item arrived uninvited, and with each one I watched our house change, not just in appearance, but in atmosphere. Mama would polish the china cabinet daily, though it brought her no joy. Daddy sat stiffer and quieter beside the new radio, its louder voice somehow drowning out our usual evening chatter, and I began to tiptoe through the rooms, as if the house itself now belonged to someone else. Sometimes gifts are not gifts. They are tools, tools of control, of reshaping a world to suit another's vision. The Colonel's presents were never about love, they were about power. Every plate, every rug, every doll whispered the same silent message: "This is my house now." And the more our home filled with these beautiful things, the emptier it felt of the warmth we once knew. But the greatest change was yet to come, one that no porcelain doll or silk rug could soften. Because soon, the Colonel wasn't just bringing gifts, he was bringing himself, more frequently, more forcefully, and he began to impose lessons on me, not of love or learning, but of discipline and fear. 4. Forced lessons and the psychology of punishment. Not long after the gifts began filling our home, another change came, quieter but far more lasting. The Colonel declared that my public school education was insufficient. "A Forrest requires more than what these common schools can provide," he said firmly. And so, on Saturday evenings, after our family dinners, I was no longer free to play or read my beloved adventure books. Instead, I would find myself seated at the kitchen table, a notebook in front of me, a pencil trembling in my hand, and the Colonel looming nearby. He called them private lessons, but they weren't about learning, they were about control. He would dictate dates from military history, bark out mathematical equations, drill me on grammar. Any hesitation, any slip, was met not with correction, but with punishment. "Pain teaches, Teresa," he would say, bringing down a wooden ruler on my small hands whenever I stumbled. "Pain is the best teacher there is." I quickly learned that the ruler was always ready, its presence as constant as the pistol at his waist. More than once I left those lessons with red welts across my knuckles. Welts. I would hide from Mama, who already had too much to carry. But what I remember most wasn't the pain of the ruler. It was the way those sessions made me feel about myself. You see, punishment like that doesn't just sting your skin, it seeps into your spirit. Every blow whispered, "You are not enough. You must be remade." The colonel never praised, he never smiled, and slowly I began to dread those evenings more than anything else in the world. There is a world of difference between discipline and domination. True teaching lifts a child up. Control disguised as teaching grinds a child down. Today, as a grandmother, I often think about those nights, and I remind every parent and grandparent I meet, correction without kindness is not education, it is erasure. But back then, I didn't have the wisdom to see this. I only knew that the house grew colder each Saturday, and that my love of learning, the very thing my teacher Mrs. Margaret had nurtured, was now being twisted into a source of fear. And just when it seemed things could not grow tenser, they did. Because the colonel wasn't content with lessons alone. He began visiting more often, appearing at odd hours, and bringing with him an air of expectation that transformed our entire household. 5. Parents caught between duty and protection. Looking back now, with the eyes of a grandmother, I see the impossible place my parents found themselves in. At the time, I was too young to fully understand, but I could feel it, a constant tension in the air, like a tightly wound string that might snap at any moment. You see, in the South during the 1950s, family loyalty ran deep, almost as deep as fear of public shame, and my father, Samuel, carried both burdens heavily. Colonel Forrest wasn't just his father, he was a man of power, with influence that stretched across our town and beyond. He knew factory owners, he had the ear of judges and sheriffs. One wrong word from him could ruin my father's job and our ability to live with dignity. Mama, on the other hand, was torn by a mother's instinct. She saw how the colonel's presence darkened our home. She heard the fear in my voice before each Saturday lesson. She noticed the marks on my hands, though I tried to hide them. At night, through the thin walls of our house, I'd hear them argue in hushed voices after they thought I was asleep. "Samuel, I don't like how he looks at her," Mama would whisper. "There's something wrong. He's my father, Martha. I can't just forbid him from coming," Daddy would reply, weariness in every word. "Then let's leave. Let's go somewhere far away. And live on." What? And how long before he finds us? You don't understand, Martha. With his connections, there's nowhere to hide. For the first time in my life, I saw the man who had always seemed steady and strong growing smaller in his own home. Each visit from the colonel chipped away at his spirit. He began drinking more in the evenings, sitting silently on the porch long after sunset. Mama tried to shield me in the ways she could. She'd hug me tighter at night. She'd sneak little sweets into my school bag. And once, a moment I'll never forget, she pressed a small silver cross into my palm before a Saturday lesson. "Keep this with you," she said softly. "It will remind you that you are loved, no matter what he says." Sometimes, love means fighting battles you know you cannot win, but fighting them anyway for the sake of those you love. My parents were caught between the iron grip of duty and the soft pull of protection. And though they were trapped, they never stopped trying to shield me in the ways they could. But even their best efforts couldn't stop what was coming, because shadows, once invited in, rarely remain still, and the colonel's presence grew heavier with each passing week. Soon he began visiting at unexpected hours, and when Daddy was called away on a business trip one stormy March night, fate and fear collided in the most terrifying way. 6. The Night of Terror, From Inspection to Self-Defense, March 1956. I had just turned 9 years old. Night in Lexington, but the skies hung heavy with dark clouds, as if they, too, sensed what was to come. Daddy had been called away on a business trip to Louisville. Before he left, he knelt beside me in our backyard. His hands trembled slightly as he held mine. "Teresa, sweetheart, be very brave. While I'm away," he whispered, "if Grandpa comes, stay close to Mama. And if anything feels wrong, anything at all, run to Mrs. Judith's house next door. Promise me." I nodded, confused and frightened by the urgency in his voice. 3 days, he said. "I'll be back before you know it." But even 3 days can hold a lifetime. That very night, the storm broke. Rain lashed against our roof as Mama and I cleared the dinner dishes. We had just finished a simple meal, rice, beans, and eggs. The warmth of the kitchen, the hum of conversation, all of it shattered with a sound we'd come to dread. 3 sharp, commanding knocks at the door. Mama froze mid-step, her dish towel falling to the floor. "Go to your room, Teresa," she whispered. "Go and stay there." I obeyed, heart pounding, slipping into my small room at the back of the house. I left the door cracked open, just enough to hear. "Augustus," Mama greeted him at the door, trying to sound calm. "Samuel isn't here tonight." "I know," came his slurred reply. "I've come to see my granddaughter." Already I could hear the change in his voice. He was drunk. And when his heavy footsteps began crossing the living room, I scrambled into bed, pulling the blanket to my chin. The door creaked open. His silhouette filled the frame. "Teresa," he called, "I know you're awake. A soldier never deceives his superior." I lay still, pretending to sleep, but my body trembled beneath the covers. He entered the room, sat on the edge of my bed, and placed a heavy hand on my hair. "You look more and more like her," he murmured. "The same eyes, the same face." That's when Mama's voice cut through the air. "Augustus, let her sleep. I've prepared coffee." For a moment, the air seemed to crackle with tension. But he stood, retreating too. The living room. Though he insisted I come too. There he presented a brooch, something that had belonged to my late grandmother. "You are the continuation of our lineage," he said, pinning it to my pajama collar, his breath heavy with whiskey. Then, as the storm outside grew louder, so did the darkness in his eyes. "You won't abandon me, will you? You're different. You understand loyalty." Suddenly, he grabbed my arm, hard, and began dragging me back down the hallway. Mama followed, pleading with him to stop. In my room, he threw me onto the bed, drawing his pistol from its holster. "You need to learn the price of disobedience," he said. The gun now pointed at Mama, holding her at bay. "Take off those pajamas," he ordered, his voice chillingly calm. Tears streamed down my face. I begged, pleaded. But his madness only deepened. His other hand reached for his belt. "You will obey me. You won't deny me what is mine by right." Then, through the roaring storm, through my silent prayers, came a voice. "Martha, Teresa, I'm home." Daddy's voice. A miracle. The door burst open. My father took one look at the scene, at me cowering on the bed, at the gun in his father's hand, and roared with a fury I'd never seen. He lunged at the colonel. A brutal struggle unfolded on the floor. "You monster! Your own granddaughter!" Daddy shouted, striking him again and again. But the colonel, trained and ruthless even in age, managed to break free. In a flash, the gun pointed straight at my father's chest. "You've always been weak, Samuel. Weak and ungrateful." A deafening shot rang out. Daddy staggered, crimson blooming on his white shirt, and collapsed to the floor. The world seemed to stop. Mama's scream pierced the air. I stared in horror, my father's blood pooling across the wooden floor. And then the colonel turned to me, gun still smoking. "Elizabeth," he murmured, lost in madness, "see what you forced me to do." In that frozen moment, something inside me shifted, a survival instinct stronger than fear. I grabbed the small knife from my bedside, the one I used to peel apples. Without thinking, I lunged forward and drove it into his neck. His eyes met mine, not with anger, but with eerie recognition. "Elizabeth," he whispered one last time before collapsing beside my father. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is action born of love, in the darkest moments when fear threatens to consume us. That night, in one unimaginable instant, childhood ended for me. But the fight was not yet over, because my father, wounded, fading, still needed us. 7. Chaos, escape, and the race for survival. For a moment after my grandfather fell, there was only silence. I remember it so clearly, the kind of silence that rings in your ears. The storm still howled outside, but inside the house, time seemed frozen. There was my father, lying motionless in a spreading pool of dark red. Mama was on her knees beside him, sobbing, pressing a torn piece of sheet to his neck. And me, I stood shaking, the small apple knife still in my bloodied hand, unable to move, unable to breathe. Then a faint sound. "He's alive," Mama gasped. "Teresa, he's breathing." Those words snapped me out of my trance. At 9 years old, I had never imagined moving a grown man. But love gives us strength we didn't know we had. Together, Mama and I lifted my father, supporting him between us as best we could. "Stay with us, Samuel." "Stay with us," Mama whispered, tears streaming down her face. We staggered down the hallway, past my grandfather's lifeless body, past the furniture that no longer mattered, and just as we reached the front door, another sound, this time from outside. "Martha, Teresa, are you all right? I heard a shot." It was Mr. Roy, our neighbor, a kind taxi driver who lived across the street. He had seen the lights flicker during the storm and heard the gunfire. Mama flung the door open. Rain poured in, drenching us instantly. Mr. Roy took one look at my father's bloodied form and sprang into action. "Quick, get him in the car. We'll go to the hospital. No time to wait." Somehow, between the three of us, we managed to get Daddy into the back seat of Mr. Roy's taxi. Mama cradled his head in her lap, her hands trembling as she tried to keep pressure on the wound. I sat beside her, still in my torn pajamas, soaked through, my hands stained with blood. Mr. Roy drove like the wind, weaving through flooded streets, headlights barely cutting through the storm. "Hold on, Samuel. You hear me? You hold on," Mama pleaded again and again. At one point, my father's eyes fluttered open, just for a moment. He looked at me, and in his gaze I saw a mixture of pain, love, and an unspoken apology. In moments of crisis, it is love, not strength, not skill, that carries us forward. When you act out of love, you can do the impossible. By the time we reached St. Vincent Hospital, Mama and I were drenched, exhausted, trembling with fear. Mr. Roy honked frantically at the emergency entrance. Doctors rushed out, whisking my father inside on a stretcher. Mama and I could only stand there in the rain, holding each other, watching them disappear through the swinging doors. And then it hit me. "Mama, I killed Grandpa," I whispered, guilt and fear crashing over me. She knelt down, cupped my face in her hands. "Listen to me. Teresa, you saved us. That man was going to kill us all. You did what you had to do." But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The doctors would fight to save Daddy. The police would soon have questions. And we, Mama and I, would have to decide what truths to tell and what truths to bury. Because even in death, the Colonel's shadow still loomed large. 8. Cover-up versus truth, navigating moral and legal minefields. The hours after we reached the hospital were a blur. While the doctors fought to save Daddy in the operating room, Mama and I were taken to a small, sterile waiting room. We sat there soaked to the bone, bloodied and trembling, in borrowed hospital clothes. I remember staring at my hands, still stained with my grandfather's blood, and wondering if they would ever feel clean again. Before long, the police arrived, 2 officers in crisp uniforms, their voices low but firm. "Mrs. Forrest, we understand there was a shooting at your home. Can you tell us what happened?" I looked to Mama, my heart racing. I was ready to tell them everything, about the knife, the fight, the terrible moment when fear had driven me to act. But Mama placed a gentle hand on mine and spoke first. "It was an argument," she began, her voice calm but measured. "My father-in-law was drunk. He shot my husband and then collapsed. His heart couldn't take it." "And the knife wounds?" one officer asked. "In the struggle, perhaps he fell on something." It was chaos. I stared at her, wide-eyed. This wasn't the truth, not all of it, but it was the version that might keep us safe. When the officers turned to me, Mama gave my hand a subtle squeeze. "Tell them what we agreed, Teresa," she whispered. And so I did. Grandpa was yelling, and then he shot Daddy, and then he fell, Mama. And I tried to help. I was only 9. But even I understood in that moment that the full truth might do more harm than good. You see, in small southern towns in the 1950s, a powerful man's reputation carried weight, even after death. The Colonel had influential friends. He was still respected in the community. Had it come out that I, a child, had killed him, even in self-defense, the consequences could have destroyed what was left of our family. Sometimes, survival means choosing which truths to tell and which ones to hold close to your heart. It isn't about dishonesty, it's about protection. In life, the line between justice and self-preservation isn't always clear. In the days that followed, the Colonel was buried with full military honors. Politicians and high-ranking officers attended his funeral, speaking of him as a patriot, a hero. No one mentioned the storm that had shattered our home. Daddy survived, though he would never fully recover. His left side remained partially paralyzed. He could no longer work as he once had. But he was alive. And to us, that was a miracle. Soon after, Mama sold the house. We packed what little we could and moved to a small town in upstate New York, hoping to start anew where no one knew the name Colonel Augustus Forrest. And I carried with me the knowledge of what I had done, what I had survived, and what we had chosen to leave unsaid. 9. Rewriting history, funeral honors, and the power of narrative. A few days after my grandfather's death, as we packed our things in quiet grief, a formal letter arrived. It was an invitation. The colonel would be buried with full military honors, a state funeral for a decorated officer, a war hero, a pillar of the community. Mama read the letter aloud, her voice flat. "They'll never know," she said quietly, "and they'll never ask." I was too young to grasp all the layers of that moment, but I could sense the weight of it. And so, dressed in borrowed black dresses, Mama and I attended the funeral. Daddy, still in the hospital, could not come. The cemetery was filled with men in uniform, polished medals gleaming, salutes crisp. Local politicians shook Mama's hand with solemn expressions. I remember standing beside her, staring at the flag-draped coffin, feeling numb. "Your grandfather was a great man," one officer told me. "You should be very proud." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them about the nights of fear, the bruises on my hands, the darkness in his eyes. But I stayed silent. The colonel had shaped the story they would remember, not the man who terrorized his family, but the hero who had served his country. History is often written by the powerful, not the truthful. Sometimes the loudest voices are not the ones who lived the story, but those who can afford to shape its telling. As the gun salutes echoed across the cemetery, I made a small promise to myself. One day I will tell the truth. One day I will share the story no one wanted to hear. That day didn't come for decades. But it is here now, in these words, in this sharing with all of you. Leaving Lexington was the next chapter. We sold the house where so much love and so much pain had lived. With a small pension and Mama's fierce determination, we moved to a quiet town in upstate New York. And there, amid new faces and unfamiliar streets, began the hardest journey of all, not survival, but healing. 10. Resilience and redemption, healing, relocation, and life lessons. Leaving Lexington felt like leaving a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. The house that once held Sunday dinners and laughter was now empty, shadowed by loss. But we knew we couldn't stay. With Daddy recovering and no longer able to work as an accountant, Mama found the strength to do what many might not. She sold the house, gathered what little savings we had, and moved us to a small town in upstate New York. We arrived with nothing but a few suitcases and a hope for a quieter life. Our new home was a modest apartment above a bakery. The first few nights, I remember lying awake, startled by every creak, every unfamiliar sound. But slowly, the rhythm of a new life began to take shape. Mama found work at a dress shop, her fingers nimble and quick with a needle. Daddy, though forever changed, found comfort in simple tasks, tending a small garden, teaching me numbers again with a soft, patient voice. And me, I returned to school, but it was different now. The curious little girl who once adored adventure stories had been replaced by a quieter child, one who knew the weight of secrets. One person helped me begin to heal. My new teacher, Mrs. Adler. She noticed how withdrawn I was, how my gaze wandered during lessons. One afternoon, she called me aside. "Teresa, sometimes the heaviest books we carry are the ones no one else can see," she said gently. "But know this, you are not alone, and every page can turn." That moment stayed with me. With time, her kindness, and Mama's unwavering love, I began to find pieces of myself again. Slowly, I returned to the stories I once loved. I started writing in a small journal Mama had given me, a place to put words to things too heavy to say aloud. Healing is not linear. Some days you'll feel strong, other days memories will pull you back. And that's okay. What matters is that you keep turning the page. Years passed. I grew. I learned to trust again, to love again. Today, as I sit on this porch in Burlington, Vermont, surrounded by my grandchildren's laughter and my husband's gentle snores, I marvel at the distance we've traveled. The scars are still there, but so is the strength they gave me. And if there is one thing I hope you carry from this story, it is this: no matter how dark the night, dawn will come. No matter how deep the wound, healing is possible. And sometimes, the hardest stories we live become the strongest stories we tell, for ourselves and for those who come after us. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share your own journey in the comments. Wherever you are, whatever you faced, remember, resilience lives in all of us. And don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Telling Stories of Grandparents, and join our growing community. From my heart to yours. Thank you for listening. Until next time, my darlings.